Hello and welcome to the latest in our group SFT tapping event. This one is called Removing the Rust Bucket of Old Consciousness. There is an underlying propensity for baked on, rusted in worldviews that are just holding people in lower consciousness. We're going to break that all apart. I'm Marvin Schneider.
And I'm Jenuine. I think this one's really important. It may be understated, but maybe not.
Well, the inspiration for this tapping event, by the way, is we are some 100 days off the November 5th, I think it is, presidential election in the US. And the polls are still indicating plus or minus a couple of percentage points, 50% thereabouts, and a non-zero probability of Donald returning to the White House, which would just be the most tragic outcome for all of humanity. And then, Jen, you and I were thinking, what is going on here? Why, after all that has been said and done, are there about 50% or possibly more that are still willing to go with Trump and the MAGA agenda and the agenda of Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation, and all of these other pretty shadowy and ugly institutions? Why is that?
Well, as you and I and other people on the call have demonstrated, what happens in the dream state is the level of consciousness right over the physical level when we go into the dream state is the astral realm. Now, people who aren't thinking of themselves as an energy being don't even consider these energies as something that is influencing them. So what will happen is I'll have dreams of psychic influence, things trying to influence me. And they're basically you know what the analogy of the canary in the cave?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm the canary in the cave. If I get psychically attacked in some way, I know what the psychic energies are trying to do. They're trying to hold down the consciousness, and they're doubling back and doubling down. And what they do is these psychic energies, it's just stagnant energy that has maybe adopted a personality, but it doesn't really have a personality sometimes. But it's just stagnant energy that circles back around and recollects onto things that we hold sacred, like family, institutions, things that we think are the highest variables of truth that define us, but they're not. All that we have in this society is baked in for this lifetime. In another lifetime, it would have been another society and another family. So we get so entrenched to believing that we are the family, the beliefs, the ideologies that we have in this present moment. And so those get corrupted. And that's what we see.
So the operative word for me there was entrenched and or rusted on. And the explanation that you provided is a very useful explanation in terms of energy. I'm going to try an explanation which those that are not that attuned to energy might resonate with, and that is that these rusted on worldviews are almost like imprinted on you from your early childhood, your family, or your friends, the kind of conversations that you have around the barbecue in your community. And so when there is a collection of worldviews around you, you adopt those, they become rusted on, entrenched. And it's almost, and the thing that I find really interesting is that once that entrenchment occurs, there is a high degree of resistance to considering any other worldview or any other facts or any other opinion. And there's a process of doubling down, and it's really, really ugly. It's insidious. And as long as there is a large proportion of the population, and we're talking about America at the moment, but it's not only America, as long as people are doubling down in their entrenched view, then they are locking themselves into old consciousness. And that's what we're addressing here today. So the underlying issue that we got here is the persistent repetition of what is plainly obvious lies. And the other thing that bothers me a whole lot is that I can understand that the original perpetrator of the lie, has a particular political agenda. The thing that bothers me a little bit is that Joe Schmo is willing to pick up those lies and run them to the ground and repeat them endlessly. And that's part of the problem that we need to address, because if we don't address that as a fundamental problem, people are going to continue to be locked in a low level of consciousness.
It all comes down to agreements. What are you agreeing with? You exist here, and just because you think you're a worthless piece of crap that doesn't have any point of view, doesn't mean it's so. As an energy being, you are empowered beyond compare. So you pretending to be worthless doesn't mean that you're not contributing. So when you just not in agreement, or when you keep your mouth shut, or if you keep silent, you're still agreeing to things by default. So pay attention to what you're agreeing to by default. And this way of doing the SFT tapping is a way to dissipate what you've been going along and agreeing with because you didn't know better. Well, now you know better, so you don't have to do it anymore. The next time that someone says, oh, this world is going to shit in a handbag, whatever that expression is, don't agree with them and say, I don't think so. There's a lot of beautiful things here. So you just shift the narrative within yourself. And if more people do that, it shifts it for the collective.
So that's how all lies that are hard baked into the fabric of society are eradicated. There's a couple of elements that I wanted to address. One is, as it relates to a particular political agenda at the moment, there are a lot of lies, blatant lies, objectively accessible lies that are hard baked into the fabric of society. But then what I'm also interested in, as much as we're dealing with those lies, the other aspect of this is that all, world views that are hard baked into the fabric of society is also another problem, because when you hard bake any particular view, whether it's a lie or not, it's just a view, then that hard baking of it means that you've limited your bandwidth so that you can't consider new alternative views. And what that's doing is it's locking you into stagnancy, because the whole momentum of the universe is to evolve, expand, expound, I think is the word that you often use. And so if you're hard baking into the fabric of society any worldview, lie or otherwise, then you're just locking yourself in, and that's a problem.
Absolutely. So when people intentionally tell lies, what they're trying to do is formulate something. It's almost like clay. They're trying to formulate this thing and make it a reality, right? So they form it into clay. This lie is like a form. And the way to bake it into the kiln is to have people believe it and agree to it and to adopt it as truth. So that's what's hard baking into society. All these lies, they're trying to do it left and right now with everything right in front of our face. And what Marvin is saying is, pay attention to these things they're trying to form as your reality, and use a visualization of smashing them to smithereens. If you got this baked on hot, smash them on the floor. Do it with all these things that you don't believe anymore.
It's worth a pause there for a second, Jen, and just consider what else is going on behind that tap on the constraints and limitations on the bandwidth of information accessible to the average Joe Schmo. So one aspect of that is the concentration of media ownership and the way that certain demographics only get certain messages because corporate media has pretty much bought out all of the, the news, the radio, the TV, the newspaper outlets, and so that the only information and the only bandwidth of information they get is the particular frequencies given out by those who have a particular agenda. That's a problem. The other part of that problem is this the corollary of this baked on rusted ideology is that once you have a worldview, there is a propensity for people to only seek out information that confirms their own worldview. And I don't know what the term is for that. There is a term for it, but it escapes me at the moment. But that's a real problem that, you associate with people that are like you, and you listen and watch things that confirm your own worldview because you don't want to be challenged. And that's this limited bandwidth idea that we're tapping into.
You want an example of that?
Yeah.
So when I lived in America, I was naively under the impression that America was the only place that was worth living in the world, that everyone else was like basically inconvenience there and third world country, whatever. But there's a lot of living outside of the confines of the American, borders. And so if people would stop dismissing everything, just say American first, America's everything, it's a way to keep people from exploring the world and how beautiful and how amazing all these aspects of the world really are.
Well, the practical reality is that there are 7.5 or 7.6 billion people on the planet that are not American. And I'm glad you mentioned the whole America First thing. I've had a bit of a rant about that on one of our previous tapping events. This whole America First rhetoric is getting really old. And I know that a lot of Americans, and this is not really bashing America so much, but I know a lot of Americans really don't have a radar for things that are going outside of America, and I get it. But the thing is that there is so much going on outside of America that is, pretty amazing, that is just not available to about the 350, 400 million Americans. And they're just not interested. And this is part of the limited bandwidth as well.
Tell them the story about that little town that you know of who thinks that the other town is all communists, and that they do nothing but complain about that town.
I don't know specifically what you're talking about, but in Oz, our version of this sort of baked on rusted ideology is in our north. So, the South in America tends to have a demographic that has particular propensities. The corollary in Oz is the North, so everything's just reversed. But in the fairly small northern rural farming communities, I'll guarantee you, at every barbecue, the topic of conversation is those. The expression is those bastard communists in Canberra. And so the equivalent in America is those communists in Washington, D.C., right? So Canberra is our political capital. And so at the end of every conversation is, oh, yeah, and those bastard communists in Canberra. And so that's how rhetoric just gets repeated and repeated. And to the point where those people that then grow up in that environment, the only thing they hear is those communists in Canberra. And they literally think that everyone in Canberra, outside of the parochial little community that they're currently living in, are communists and the enemy. And that's how this baked on rusted ideology just perpetuates. And it's insidious. It needs to end.
Absolutely. It's such a waste of energy. This beautiful, well, it's the next tap, this beautiful energy that is a human spirit. It's being desecrated to just spit venom at anyone around them. It's a way of kind of poisoning your own well. I wonder if there's a correlation by the people who entrenched in their religion and believe in all aspects of their religion are buying the bullshit that is being like perpetuated for control in current events. Maybe there's a correlation. They've been trained to buy the bullshit.
Yeah.
So if you put your highest regard in what you're told, then you can't discern between what the people by an outer trust and your inner compass and what your inner compass is actually telling you. You lose that subtlety, and then you just buy anything as truth. People are buying the lies out there as truth. It's so frustrating.
So, so the interesting idea there is that if you're willing to debase your ability to discern by buying into, religious rhetoric, then you're probably willing to debase your moral compass by buying into any particularly political rhetoric as well.
Yes, and what we're seeing at a high echelon is if you're willing to debase your own integrity, you will let go of your inner compass and all you know as truth and switch over to the lies just to perpetuate your own power, your own power on the ladder. J.D. Vance, we're talking about you. You're the poster child of that, by the way.
Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned J.D. Vance. I was pretty certain that's exactly what you're referring to. And if you didn't say it, I was going to basically say J.D. Vance. We're basically describing you. And it's just so interesting that someone who began with a little bit of a thoughtful ability to think through alternative perspectives within a very short amount of time is willing to 180-degree debase himself at the feet of the most vile rhetoric just to satisfy his own ego, self-interest, and pursuit of power. And
but here's the thing about him, and I'm getting it like in real time right here. The reason, so his career before he sold out to power wasn't very impressive. He was moving along and he had some talent, whatever, he had some integrity. It wasn't getting him far enough. And the reason it wasn't getting him far enough is because integrity, it has separated itself from this monster of power. So a lot of good, kind, helpful people are wondering why they're not getting more money, they're not getting more clout in the world, because they've been separated like from the power factions, which includes gobs of money, because it's curdled and soured. And that curdling and soured, that's going to be extracted from consciousness. And if they could have just held on to their integrity, they could have been part of a movement to bring all humanity into higher consciousness. And poor JD, he sold out early.
I have a question for people that are watching this from home, because I'm fairly certain that everyone that's on this Zoom call has seen this, but I put a post up recently trying to tease out and explore core American conservative values. And as part of that post, I put up an image, which I'm going to share. So I asked the AI, interestingly, to generate for me the quintessential, an image of the quintessential reflection of core American values. And this is what it came up with. And Jen, you had an interesting take on this picture when I put it up. Can you just share with us your reaction as you saw it for the first time?
Well, I don't remember what I told you then, but it just reminds me of something that was created during like the 50s or 60s, when America was not so. The average America only didn't have the social media. You weren't privy to other cultures and such. So the vantage point was the white Christian family, white picket fence, and everything. So it's outdated and outmoded, and everyone is changing their own constructs from their own experiences. And so, what these factions are trying to do is prevent you from having experiences so that you don't get more information for yourself. That's why they're banning books and all these different things. They don't want you to have access to people from other countries because you'll learn how different the trajectory is for other people. Is that what you want, babies?
Yeah, the other thing is that so you're quite right, it definitely does hark back to an old era, and it probably is about post-war 50s, 1950s in America, but it is very white-centric. That's one aspect. It's incredibly the nuclear family oriented. It's 100% America first, and it is all about, free market economies, religion, morality, or at least their view of morality at the center. And the interesting thing is that I use that image to invite those that have conservative leanings to come onto the Declaration of Universal Interdependence Facebook page and share with us what it is about their core values, their worldview, that bakes in that conservative ideology and why it's so important to them. And the more that I look at that image, the more I think that it really does represent an old consciousness that really does need to get shaken up and thrown out, because the problem with those that are on the more right end of the conservative spectrum, particularly in America, is that it is that worldview is incredibly exclusionary. It really does exclude the participation of the vast majority of people on the planet. And so that's what we're shaking up here today, removing this rust bucket of old consciousness. So I'm so glad we did the taps, because I don't know of any other way I don't know of any other acid to melt away the rusting on of old consciousness as represented in that image.
You know what? I have a challenge for all those who are hell bent on preserving the family unit. And it's like, if they truly believe at the core that this is a one life scenario, why are they so worried about what happens to the future after they leave it? After they're dead and gone, who gives a rat's ass? They'll be dead and gone. But that core fear of things changing betrays itself to their understanding inwardly that they do go on and they do want things to be better in the future, not for their children, but for themselves. And so so that's the oxymoron. If they do go on, why do they care? They actually are concerned that they're going to they want to land back into a white privilege again. They're terrified of not landing in a white privilege.
Most people in a religious context do not believe in reincarnation and the eternal soul. They do believe in the one life scenario. That's what Jen was referring to. And, the evidence that a lot of those that are more expansive in their thinking have is that we are all eternal souls. So here's the oxymoron that you were trying to tease out, Jen. On the one hand, the staunch religious Christian, Judeo-Christian rhetoric around the one life scenario is heavily dominant. And then your question was, if that's the case, why are they trying to perpetuate these family dynasties, right? And the perversion that I think where you're getting at is deep down in their psyche. as much as they prefer not to acknowledge themselves as eternal souls, they recognize that they in fact actually are. And one of the underlying reasons why they want to perpetuate this family dynasty is so that they can reincarnate back into the wealth, the privilege, the entitlement that has been created and established in this lifetime, and just jump into the same scenario in a future lifetime. And so,
Bingo.
and there you go. And so this is my challenge to I think that's a perversion, by the way. My own personal view is that in every incarnation, you should start from the ground up and make of each life the best life with your passion and purpose in the way that you intend to contribute to the well-being of all of humanity in this life, and the next life, independent. And this whole family dynasty and creating wealth and passing it on to the next generation is a real problem, because the children of the privileged, entitled, and wealthy they really don't have to stand up on their own feet. And this is what I think needs to happen: 100% death tax. So when you finish this life and you've accumulated a shitload of wealth, all of that wealth needs to be drained from the next generation.
That's a good point. And here's something that I've researched in my private sessions. Now, I've had a few chance to work with some wonderfully open and loving gay people. And in a couple of their past lifetimes, they were blatant gay bashers. So we had to release their unworthiness. And what they were basically doing now is self-loathing themselves from a past lifetime. Their psyche from the past lifetime was self-loathing them in the present, and we released that. But what's happening now is these people don't understand, who want these internment camps, want to give those who are immigrants the most miserable existence possible. Where do you think they're going to land? They're not going to land in privilege anymore. They're going to land in their own internment camps that they've created. People who are destroying this world and trying to create as much suffering as possible for someone over there is actually creating it for themselves. If they understood that one concept, that they're making the misery for themselves by what they inflict on others, they're going to be incarnated right there to see it, because they don't have compassion right now. They need to live it to have compassion. So the universe will put them right in the middle of it. So if they understood that, then selfishness and fear would prevent them from inflicting pain on others. It's that easy.
If you like this content and you appreciate the work that we're doing to uplift all of humanity and to help heal your body, mind, and soul, please consider becoming a Jenuine Healing premium content subscriber. Simply jump onto the Jenuine Healing website, jenuinehealing.com with a J, and click on the purchase button on the top menu. Scroll down, there's a premium content option. Click on that, sign up. It's a simple monthly plan for $20 a month, and you will have access to all of the premium content that we put up on the Jenuine Healing website. We look forward to catching you next time, and bye for now.